So I believe it is. So I'm here mostly to tell a story today.
And who would you be?
Sara Frug. I work for the Legal Information Institute at Cornell Law School. The LII spent the better part of 2010 developing a web version of the Code of Federal Regulations. Our work was part of a joint study between the Federal Depository Library program, the United States Government Printing Office, the Office of the Federal Register, and I don't know how familiar everyone here is with the way that the CFR is produced, but the Office of the Federal Register is the author for the book. They take the regulations that are promulgated by the agencies and compile them together and provide current awareness on that. And then annually they prepare an update, which is the CFR book. And the GPO is the printer of the book. The FDLP had approached us because of our experience processing typesetting code. And actually, we did a version of the CFR that was based on processing typesetting code. Shortly thereafter, the GPO made available an XML version of the CFR that they offered in bulk through their FDSys program. So we switched over to using that as our source data. Today I will show you what we built, explain why it was hard to build it, and offer a few reflections. So a year ago, my colleagues and I stood up here and showed off our new CFR prototype. It was very shiny. It had a lot of fancy technology under the hood. We were kind of proud of it. And we thought we had about 3 months before we sent it off to earn its living on our website. And it's been a year. And we've just started whispering to people about the beta that we have up on our site. This is what it looks like now. It has all of the features that we had thought that we would manage to get into it. It offers the full text of the Code of Federal Regulations, and then has some navigation features, breadcrumb, and tables of contents. It marks up the nested paragraph structure of the CFR, which is something that was a little bit more complicated than we expected because the printed book of the CFR doesn't do any indentation. The marking up that nesting lets us do pinpoint cross-references to sub-paragraphs of the CFR. We have an updating feature. Our currency will show when the text of the CFR was authored. The rulemaking tab shows new rules that have been in the rulemaking process, and then the authorities shows the statutory authority for each part of the CFR. Behind the scenes, we get raw XML from the government's FDSys system. We have pre-processing software that extracts the hierarchical structure of the CFR and marks up the paragraphs and citations and cross-references. We have generated XML that goes into an XML database, and then other processing scripts parse data from the parallel table of authorities and the Federal Register, which we maintain in a relational database. The content management system, which is Drupal, which you keep hearing about around these parts, extracts the XML from the XML database and turns it into HTML text and wraps it inside the rest of the HTML for the website. And we're using an open source search engine, Zolar, for full text search. So why did it take so long? one of the reasons was that we used this project as a lab for changing a lot of our platform. Our basic toolkit, the XML and the PHP and MySQL, were all very familiar. We had used the content management system before, although this was one of the first sophisticated add-on modules that we developed, and the first time that we'd used it for a large-scale corpus, which turned out to mean that there were some scaling issues that we had not run into before that caused us some problems. The Exist XML database, though, was pretty much brand new to us, and so was the Solr search engine. Solr was the sort of new technology for us that we would hope new technology would be like, which was that it required us to learn some new things in order to use it, but then it functioned approximately the way that we had hoped. Exist caused us some trouble because there were things about the configuration that were fairly sensitive, and we didn't learn all of the things that we ended up finding out in advance of actually trying to build something with it, and that was a process that was a little bit more painful than we might have liked. Each of the new components was interesting to us, and we were interested in migrating a lot of our collections onto the same platform, but we didn't certainly allow as much extra time as we might have in order to really work out all of the kinks. Other reasons why it took so long, and these are the things that I think are probably more interesting in this room. It's worth mentioning that although the CFR does dictate a standard organization which tells agencies exactly how they should enumerate a title. Well, the title is always the same, but anything down from the subtitle, chapter, subchapter, part, subpart, section, there is a wide variety of ways in which individual programs within agencies actually end up assigning numbers or even titles to pieces of the CFR, and so it is not something that is easy to process and get good collation from off the bat. There are other artifacts of print production. The bulk XML made available via FDsys is the XML that corresponds to the printed book, and so it contains markup that can be formatted to make pages of a book. It contains, therefore, the CFR text and everything else that would go into a volume of CFR. So it required quite a learning process just to look at that XML and find the material that we required in order to present the text of the CFR on our website. Then there was GPO's quarantine policy. It was a big problem for us. We were in a joint study arrangement with them, but their policy was that when they were alerted to a defect in their source material, they would place it into quarantine, which would remove it from public access. And so we would sometimes be in the situation of losing access to the source material that we were dependent upon because we weren't maintaining long-term archives of everything. This was something that took us by surprise a little bit. And their update process could take as long as 3 months. So there were times at which we were not able to offer the entire corpus just for that reason. But what I'd like to focus on more are the last two items, problems with this processing of the source material and problems with the metadata. The CFR book is authored by the Office of the Federal Register and printed by the GPO. The Office of the Federal Register, as I mentioned, gets its source material from more than 50 active rulemaking agencies, each of which has many, many programs. There is no end-to-end XML authoring system. And the quote that you see up there is what the GPO team that worked on FDSys said about their XML end product. One translation of how they are characterizing the schema would be the tags close. Another, maybe less charitable one would be garbage in, garbage out. I don't really see a lot of confidence there in the schema reflecting anything more than the presence of particular elements within a CFR volume document. The main problems we ran into, a couple of examples, sometimes elements would close prematurely. It's a little bit hard to see, and I've struggled with how to show this, but what you see there is the CFR text and the subchapter, chapter, and title elements closing before a great deal of additional text of CFR subparts and sections and the containing subchapter and chapter and parts. Another problem that we would run into was that text would be swallowed. When a section or subpart or a part was superseded, it's represented in the XML with this rev text element. And here the problem was that it would close, it wouldn't close when it should, and it would swallow the entire remainder of the text. And frequently they would nest inside each other. You could actually detect this problem fairly easily by looking for sibling elements of an initial rev text element, just as for a title element that closed too early, you could detect the problem by noticing whether there were elements that should be descendants of a title outside the title element. Another problem was unreliable metadata. An example with that was in Title 41. The part just had a slightly unconventional enumerator, and the metadata file says that it contains a range of parts that is not accurate, and then it says it contains a range of sections which is actually accurate. So certainly it's possible to detect this problem or detect that there is a problem by comparing what the section number claims the part numbers would be with what the part claims that the part numbers are. You could also do tests to see whether there are any structural elements that seem to exist but don't have any enumerators, or whether the same enumerator is repeated within the CFR. For instance, if you have multiple parts that are called Part 50 reflected in the mods, that shouldn't be happening, and you could realize that there's a problem by running a fairly simple test to detect that. So, what's my point? Librarians and programmers have complementary skills. We have bulk government data available, but it's not quite viable yet. The material in the FDSys program is authenticated. It is represented as authoritative, but it's not, the markup is not accurate. And so in order to make government data viable, we need to collaborate. Librarians know the corpus backwards and forwards frequently. We did a demonstration to the government printing office and the Federal Depository Library program, and there were the librarians asking us questions about particular facets of the CFR and asking us how did you handle appendices, how did you deal with these kinds of enumerators, how did you do the subparts that don't have any numbers or letters attached to them. They knew everything there is to know about the corpus, and a lot of that knowledge we had to work pretty hard to reconstruct at some points because we didn't have constant communication back and forth. We had these periodic meetings. So librarians can tell programmers things like, don't bother to try to figure out the CFR numbering system. The agencies just throw random characters in there. You will not make much progress trying to understand every single enumerator you're ever going to see. Librarians also told us Federal Register as a label for a tab is not very descriptive and is probably misleading. Are you talking about authorities, or are you talking about currency, or are you talking about rulemaking activity? Technologists, on the other side, can do useful, I think, contribute meaningfully and do useful work in collaboration with librarians by presenting engineering understanding of what it entails to get a corpus like this one, a large, more than 100,000 page work government data into a machine-readable and human-readable product available on the web. Programmers can tell librarians things like 70% of this document is marked up inaccurately, or it's computationally expensive to extract the data we need when mods are structured in the way that they are structured. The FDSys data should be accurate, both text and the markup, and it can be, but not without our taking the time and putting in the kind of focused attention that is required in order to justify the investments needed to make it accurate. And as I say this, I find myself thinking, well, I imagine that on one side there's the people in the FDSys program wondering why their funding is being cut when they have valuable work available, and in another neighborhood there's Carl Malamud saying, well, I've made all of this material available. Is anybody actually going to do anything with this? There's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and there are meaningful contributions that don't require everyone to spend half of their time working on this project. There are small, useful increments of work that can be used to great advantage. And so that's the particular piece of the puzzle that I am trying to focus on right now. I really am very, very interested, though, in what questions you might have for me, for my colleagues who are in the room. I think I've lost, actually, Dan Nagy, who has provided all of the infrastructure for the underlying infrastructure for this project. But I really want to know and hear what questions you have about this project, about what we're up to in general, and about what you see open access to law providers doing in this arena. So I will welcome your questions. John. Yes.
At least within departments, was it possible to find patterns? Was the disorderliness some kind of pattern that could be seen, at least to any extent?
Well, there were certain problems that we ran into. Actually, the premature closing seemed to be not something that we could find much of a pattern to. It seemed to just happen. That revised text seemed to very clearly correspond to a bug in their processing code because it just wouldn't. Something had obviously been inserted and it wouldn't. Whatever had been inserted was improperly wrapped. It would be inserted with an opening tag and not the closing tag. And because the schema was so lax, it always validated. It just didn't correspond to the structure. And so I would say of all of these bugs, there's nothing in there at this point in the pre-processing code that requires a manual step. So from that perspective, you can say that you detect a pattern. But
Yeah, that's the bottom line that I was going to get to.
But there are many, many, many examples that it's just that every time we thought that we had covered all of the cases, we would find more cases, more examples, more variety, just a more different. We spent a certain amount of time trying to track down how things are numbered, and at the end, if you look at the metadata, the mods files, you'll see that they didn't. The GPO team, FDSys team, did not feel that it was possible to really do that. They would assign a sequence number to every granule. So from walking from the top down that they came across in a document, and then everything would correspond back to a sequence number because it just didn't seem to really be possible. Tom. Microphone.
I'm going to try to turn this microphone on. Oh, I have to hold it down. Now that's very annoying. I'm not going to do that.
But I guess I'm curious how you see people in this room, how you see that kind of collaboration happening, because there are a lot of working parts to this. I know that there are people in this room who are very interested in mods, because mods solve many problems for certain purposes, and they can be implemented, as far as I can tell, in a variety of different ways. But because they are so flexible, I'm about to send this over. Because they're so flexible, I don't see a lot of yet collaboration on how to represent certain kinds of things in the mod. So we would find that what we would see here was that everything goes into everything goes in. You should be able to see this up there. Everything goes into an extension on the related item, and in the extension they've come up with a way to represent elements that correspond to identifiers and to ranges in order to make it possible to discern the structure. But what you tend to see is that the things that would make processing much more efficient, where you would have, for instance, for any section, you would see the hierarchy above it. That isn't there, because what is easy to find out about a section is represented there, and what is hard to find out about a section would require some additional work, and there are a lot of trade-offs to be made there. But I think that what it seems like, looking at this output and then looking at what the team that did the engineering on this had to say about it, is that they were taking their best shot at extracting as much data as they could out of these files, and then representing as much as they could in this particular way. But that the result of that is not necessarily something that makes it all that workable to use the data in the way that most people would expect. Most people who wanted to use the data to develop an application of some variety around this would expect to have available at their fingertips. And so the most basic thing of just mapping what the expectations are of this sort of at the end. Who are the users? What are the use cases? How do we anticipate people? What kind of information do we anticipate people trying to get out of this? And this is something that librarians have a great deal of experience. What are the expectations people develop by using other sources on a day-to-day basis? Because one of the pieces of feedback we got from talking to librarians was at the GPO and the Federal Depository Library program, was that this did not correspond to what they saw from the commercial publishers, or B, the currency that they saw in the ECFR. And so those are the kinds of things that librarians in their day-to-day work have much more familiarity with, and can provide expertise about. But I'm curious. Is there anything that jumps to mind?
see if my microphone is working. Well, I'll just come over it from a very pragmatic viewpoint. You know, if I'm a lawyer looking for the law, it's not just data to us, it's the law. So I want to see the body of information. And the day that they implement the amendments, I want to see that incorporated right away. Are you saying now, with all this snow on my roof, that I'll never see that in my lifetime because of all these problems?
What you can get from an open access publisher is one of two things. There are two products currently available. There is the eCFR, which is updated. It's 2 days. It's 2 days behind. Lags 2 days. I assume for our purposes that's adequate currency. Yes.
Well, I mean, you have to be up to date. You can't be 2 days behind for sure, but you have to.
Okay. So
you have to double check the Federal Register for the gap in between. But
right, but that would be.
So.
Consider that to be adequate.
So, what was your goal here? To recreate what used to be in the books in that same pattern, or to create a real-time information base for legal work?
We would love to do that. What we are able to do is something similar to what we are able to do for the United States Code, which is to take the most recently available authoritative version of the document as it is provided by the government, and to provide updating features that enable a user to see quickly when the cutoff date is and what the updates are since the cutoff date. And until the government publishes in machine-readable format. On the CFR side, they're publishing the eCFR that is not available in bulk or in XML. On the U.S. Code side, it's not available at all from the federal government, even in a non-official version. And so, and when you see that from a commercial publisher, somebody is doing that by hand, compiling updates by hand. So that when the government makes available timely bulk data, then open access publishers are able to produce that kind of a product. What you see from the FDSIS in those revised texts with the updates is an attempt on their part to incorporate more recent updates, but the structure of the source data is such that it doesn't seem to be all that feasible to do an automated update reliably, accurately yet. Were the source material in better shape, it should be possible to left the microphone on the table. Were the source material, those volume files, up to date, then it should be possible to it would be possible to automate a set of updates, at least to the point that one could be reasonably assured that the material was accurate. Which is not the answer I would be happy to give, but I think it's fairly accurate.
Federal
was not an enormous fan of quarantine. There, I should maybe explain a little bit more about quarantine. Obviously, there is this back-end system that they run that is available to, for instance, authoring and metadata enhancement and all sorts of functions that cannot be open to the general public. And then there is the public system. FDSys, who here has looked at FDSys at all? Have you used it for, what do you use it for?
I teach basic research, so I use it quite often with my students. I prefer GPO access, but
For which materials?
we go in and out of U.S. Code, CFR, Federal Register, some of the legislative history documents.
Uh-huh.
So we use quite a few of their materials.
And given that that material is not completely up to date, what do you see to be the utility of it?
Well, I mean, that's the joy of free and government resources. I mean, we're used to telling the students, the last U.S. Code come out was 2006.
Mm-hmm.
So be prepared for that. But that said, some of their information, like the Federal Register,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really get any of the information for that.
Oh, certainly.
So
And you said that you preferred GPO access. Why was that?
I like their browser better than FDSys. It aggravates me sometimes when trying to browse FDSys, particularly with the CFR. I like being able to see the different titles and go back to the computers like that. I like the layout.
Mm-hmm.
Searching's a lot better off.
Searching is much
Filtering.
browsing is better on
Yeah,
GPO access. Searching is better on FDSys, definitely.
And this is a CFR on FDSys, and one of the things that we notice is that it just takes a very long time to respond when you click someplace on here. And actually, the other problem that we noticed was that in places where the markup is incorrect, the tables of contents can be incorrect as well, so it can be hard to browse. On the search side, what would you there is metadata enhanced search on FedSys. What metadata do you find to be useful, or what metadata would you like to be able to use for searches?
Sarah, are you just talking about the CFR?
In general, on FedSys. So there is some named entity detection, and they are using some of that to provide faceted search. But are there other?
I do all sorts of legal research. I also part of a professional practice. And it's actually quite nice.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And the metadata, are there things? Obviously, not all the metadata that's in mods is incorporated as fielded search. Are there things in there that you think would be worthwhile for them to offer, or are there things that are not captured there? Mm-hmm. 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 this is to some extent selfish because it's our opportunity to get more feedback on what you guys expect out of legal research teachers in the room, what you guys expect out of this sort of product, and I no, not hesitant, not at all. It is, if I'm not mistaken, behind a different tab here at this point. Please.
Is that there are all kinds of subsectioning within the U.S. Code, and even more of it in CFR, that quite frankly, people in government are concerned with.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it there, and it looks like it's important, so you want to do something with it. But in practice, it's not actually used. Like there's, right there, Title 41. Subtitle B, Chapter 15. But how often does any actual actually quite rarely. I mean, the practical granularity is on the section level and title of section. And then everything else is a useful add-on to a certain extent.
We were
I found that to be the approach.
That's very interesting. We were told that chapters are important because they correspond to structural units within government frequently, and parts tend to correspond to particular programs within agencies.
Right, and that's why they're there, and they do have meaning. But again, practically speaking, it follows kind of the citation pattern. You don't put in a citation to the part of the chapter. It's always just title and section.
Well, CFR is,
People usually do that.
but CFR is part section, right?
Chapters and subchapters.
Right.
The question we asked that got us that was, what's the stable place to hang your hat in this whole structure? As this thing evolves over time, what's not moving? And the answer we got was, well, it's actually part of it that you hang your hat, because you're accredited, the programs don't change. The parts correspond to them. So you're actually going to find the most structural stability. But you're right, there's two conceptual mappings being laid on this. There's sort of taxonomic and logical, and kind of part not. And then there's a sort of structural government on that really goes straight to part.
Well, we anticipated that people would get to a section, and so all of that hierarchy, and when you say all of that hierarchy doesn't seem to be all that important, it's a little painful because that's much of what took us all of that work. But it's there. One of the purposes of it is just, I think, to accurately reflect the structure of the document, but also to facilitate the ability to get a bigger picture look at what by checking out the adjacency. So I think we frequently anticipate that somebody will come looking for a part or a section, and that they then might click up to the next level up to see where they are, and to see what else is around. And so we actually at the moment have the search engine indexing those tables of contents, which means that, and let's hope that this works. So let's see. Okay. So we'll get, this is sort of one of our favorite examples. We have, if we search for Asian longhorn beetle, we get the subpart that corresponds to that and all the regulations there, but it actually is maybe useful to know that it's treated in this area with domestic quarantine, and here are the other things that are also treated by the same organization within the government.
That is true. Table of contents are very important.
This is also actually something that we're working earlier, which is kind of non-enumerated subparts. You'll notice that none of us actually carry
Oops.
any
Yeah.
number in the letter. They're just kind of there.
These we made up. We made up enumerators for these because we just didn't have we assigned unique identifiers to granules of the CFR based on the numbering, and here we just broke down and said, okay, this is an enumerator because it's nice. It's nice to be able to type into the browser a URL that's based on the part and section of the CFR that you want to find, and here we have nothing. So we're just generating a customized enumerator for that. So those are what you saw in the screenshot that you don't see here yet is that we are fixing up those tabs, and so there's the one that's missing at the moment is currency, and that is just in the queue to happen next, and we were taken to task for calling one of the tabs Federal Register, and so we did actually break it out into authorities, currency, and rulemaking in order to, we hope, make it a little bit clearer what we're up to there. Sure. Is that, I don't think that we have actually at that part level there authorities. Let's try one that I know that we have. Okay. So this is, these are just there are some places where it's not just U.S. code. There are executive orders, is that correct? And then for rulemaking, this is still a little disorganized, but this is just a reverse chronological listing from the Federal Register, and we intend to break that out into essentially the currency tab will have, here's when this was updated, and here are the final rules that came in after that, and then the rulemaking tab is intended to show rulemaking activity broken out by essentially notice and comment stage material and other categories of rulemaking activity in addition to the final rules. Yeah.
It's a long time. So if you look at everything, every rulemaking that affected, I don't know, some of the more popular parts of the environmental, there are just going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of items there. And we thought, well, we could make the system perform a little better if we knew where the break point was likely to be between, if we knew that there was a sunset period past which we could guarantee that rules would close. So we asked people, how far back do we have to go to make sure that we've got every active open rule under consideration in the system? The result from the managing editor of the Federal Register was hysterical laughter.
Other questions, comments, criticism? Yeah.
Maybe I'm missing it, but I don't see anything on this beta that gives me an effective date as of when these regulations are current. That would be very helpful to have if it's not there.
Right. So the effective date notes are within the text. Either, let's see. Yeah.
Not the date the regulation became effective, but the date as of which you have updated all of the regulations.
So that will be currency. That's the missing tab. Yeah. We're still working out the last few bits of it. So is that any other questions? There's an attribute to this.